Right. So in 2024, Sam Mendes announced that he was going to be doing something rather unprecedented in terms of filmmaking and cinema. And it was that he was going to be doing four interconnected Beatles biopics. So, casting. Now, people form opinions pretty quickly when you've decided the cast that you are hiring to play your favourite actor, musician, etc., in a biopic. I know for a start that I was instantly gobsmacked, and not in a good way, when I found out Hugh Jackman was playing um, Neil Diamond in Song Sung Blue. Oh man, I was like, what? Anyway, sorry, it just makes me laugh thinking about it, I'm afraid. So, anyway, casting. So, Paul Mescal, he's going to be playing Paul McCartney. Now, Paul Mescal, of course, has been in Gladiator 2, After Sun, Normal People, and recently I saw him in Hamlet, of which I thought he played the role of William Shakespeare pretty darn well. So, you know, craft wise, yes, it makes sense. He's a good actor, he's got a lot of range. Um, Paul McCartney, although he was known or seen as the cute Beatle back in the day, he is, as legacy shows, hyper driven. He can be quite emotionally guarded. And, he is quietly competitive, let's face it. He wouldn't be where he is today if he didn't have any of those qualities about him. So, but the risk is, of course, that if Paul Mescal doesn't play this role well enough, um, people there could be the risk of people forever seeing him as the guy who tried to play Paul McCartney, and that does not help you when you are trying to get film roles, theatre roles, etc. Because you don't want to be viewed as, oh, that's the guy who just tried and couldn't do it. So yeah, Paul Mescal. I hope that he does the job well. As I say, I think he's a pretty good, versatile actor, actually. So, we'll see. Now, one surprise that was thrown in the mix is the actor playing John Lennon, and that is Harris Dickinson. Now, it did raise eyebrows, this one, but, you know, quietly started to make a bit of sense. So, Dickinson has played quite volatile, magnetic characters, really. He was in The Triangle of Sadness and also The Iron Claw, which I think was a really, really great film. Um, so, he can be charming, but also quite unsettling. Um, but if you think about it, you know, that could work quite well because Lennon wasn't just a rebel poet. He could be funny and also very cruel, and he was insecure. Um, he's emotionally unpredictable. You know, and politically, I suppose you could argue politically quite radical in his own way. Um, so I think the danger there isn't that Harris Dickinson can't handle the role. Um, I think the danger is really John Lennon himself, because modern audiences, to a certain degree, don't mythologize Lennon the same way, well, earlier generations, including mine, I have to say, did. So they'll interrogate him, really, just explore this character and think, well, which is not a bad thing. And this film can't go about sanitizing Lennon and, his complex character, because if it does sanitize it, it's just the film's going to be ripped to shreds, isn't it? Let's face it. People want reality. I know escapism's good, but sometimes you need the whole picture. In a way, this feels like you're sort of cementing the Beatles' legacy once and for all, really. So yeah, you got to be true to it, because it wasn't all fun and laughter and all that business, was it? It was a bit more than that. So Our next character is George Harrison, played by Joseph Quinn. Now then, I have to confess, when I saw Joseph Quinn as George Harrison in some of the pictures that have been released, I've got to be honest, I was not convinced. He reminded me indeed of some fellas I used to remember back in the 80s when I was a rocker, a metalhead, down at the local pub. So, sorry. But anyway, Joseph Quinn, known for Stranger Things, A Quiet Place, Day One, which I quite like actually, not a bad film. So he can, excel really at characters that are quite intense, and perhaps are a bit overlooked, say, for argument's sake. George Harrison lived in the shadow, let's face it, of Lennon and McCartney, for years, didn't he? Despite being one of the most spiritually and musically adventurous members of the band. So the risk in this respect for George, or the character who's going to be playing him, Joseph Quinn, no doubt, is going to be not performance as such, but screen time. Now, if you think about it, George has always been treated as and was known as the quiet one, the quiet Beatle. So if this film doesn't really commit to his inner life, his resentment, his spiritual journey, his late blooming confidence in the shadow of these titans, it's going to be sort of repeating history instead of sort of correcting it and unlocking it. So let's hope they do well by George in this film. Now, the next and last member in this lineup of these four biopics is going to be Barry Keoghan as Ringo Starr. Now, he's been termed, I think, as a bit of a wild card in this biopic project. Now, he's unpredictable. He can be eerie sometimes, heartbreaking, but, he is always interesting. Now, Barry is going to be playing, obviously, Ringo, but Ringo wasn't just the comic. His life really was marked by some illness, a lot of illness as a kid, insecurity, and isolation. And that includes the band. If you think about it, he left the White Album sessions, because he felt that even though he's a member of the band, he didn't feel like it. So at the end of the day, will this film let Ringo be sad? In other words, you don't want to turn Ringo into a punchline just because he was quite a funny guy. You don't. So quiet melancholy. Can you? I wouldn't want that role really to play, but I don't think Ringo's that bad, especially not these days. He always seems pretty upbeat to me. But anywho, but that's what they're looking for apparently. But it could be, the emotional surprise that's needed on this project, and it would be good to see a bit more about Ringo and, of course, his life and warts and all the struggles he had. And I think, to be honest, I think Ringo's story could be quite interesting if it's played well. So I'm quite looking forward to that because I quite like Ringo. He's all right, he is. So why are Beatles biopics so dangerous? Well, everybody already knows who the Beatles are. But of course, we all know them differently. For some, they're sacred. For others, they're overrated. Others, they're personal, memories relating to family or, different events in life or identity. So you're not really just telling a story, actually. you are really tinkering with something that people think they already own. You know, you got to be honest, the Beatles are a part of British pop culture, and whether you like them or not, you know, they have made quite a dent, actually. I think, for me, even though, you know, a lot of the guys went over and lived in the US and John stayed there, they're still, to me, the guys who belong to us anyway. So, you know, so there you go. These things do matter. So they're not trying to answer the story, you know, what were the Beatles or anything like that. They're asking, what did it feel to be like one of them? And I think that's quite a good, fresh interpretation, really. Um, so if Sam Mendes embraces contradiction, you know, has a John Lennon that's visionary but also cruel. If you've got a Paul McCartney that's a bit of a genius but also controlling, a George Harrison who's patient but also bitter, and Ringo who's lonely but also very funny, you know, they could make a set of films that finally humanize the most mythologized band in history. So, you know, not legends or icons, but basically four men who changed the world and didn't always survive emotionally intact. So, what to make of all this? They're not going to be safe, are they? These Beatle biopics, again, you know, this has been said repeatedly through this video that they are a big risk. They're not nostalgia projects for a start, and they're not crowd pleasing in the traditional sense. They're a bit of a cinematic higher wire act, but you know, this might make them worth watching, because if you're going to tell the Beatles story again, you don't want to go through the same old, you know, same old, same old. Uh, you know, you've got to go for something completely new. And I think seeing them, each member of the band experiencing the same thing in their own perspective, will be a breath of fresh air. So anyway, thank you for watching. I know it's been a bit of a long video. Hope you've enjoyed it. Continue to, you know, perhaps subscribe if you haven't, or, you know, hit that like button. But thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you soon.